welcome back to my channel. My name is Ayala. I'm the mother of two, a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old, and today I am talking all about puzzles. On this channel, I share about Montessori, respectful parenting, motherhood, all sorts of things like that. So if you follow me over on Instagram, which if you don't, you should, you will know that my son, who's just turned 2 a couple months ago, is loving puzzles right now. He is absolutely obsessed with jigsaw puzzles, and I've gotten so many questions about introducing jigsaw puzzles, about introducing puzzles in general, about puzzle progression, about how I help him through some of these more challenging puzzles. So I thought I would come on here and really talk through a whole puzzle progression and also how I help him and support him through some challenging jigsaw puzzles, because he's loving some big 24-piece floor puzzles, which are quite challenging for his age. And so I'm going to discuss how I help him through that and how we've scaffolded those skills. So here we go. Here is a puzzle progression. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, which is the first puzzles we introduced to my son. So the first puzzle was single piece peg puzzles. These are really great for working on that pincer grasp because they are picking up the peg with their 2 fingers, and that pincer grasp is really the beginning of some pre-writing skills that you see that pincer grasp developing in the later part of the first year of life. So we introduced the pincer puzzle around 10 months. He wasn't super into them right away. As time passed, he got a bit more into it. At first, he just liked taking out the piece. So I'd present the piece in and he enjoyed taking out the piece, and that was working on his pincer grasp. And then around a year, I would say, he started getting more into actually doing the puzzle and putting the piece back in. We had one of those single piece ones that had a baby's face inside and also a mirror one. He enjoyed both of those. In particular, the mirror was very, very fun for him. He really found that engaging. With single piece ones, we started with a circle, and that's the simplest piece because the circle can go in any direction. And then we introduced a triangle and then a square. So that's more difficult because there are more ways that they have to, more sides means you have to get it more exact. So you want to start with the circle, and then you can do the triangle and the square. And I did DIY sort of the mirror ones on the triangle and the square as well, because he loved that on the circle when we bought. So I did some DIY of that, but that was our progression there. And then a little after a year, he had gotten those single piece ones and we switched to multi-piece. So they make ones that are a board that have, 3 different ones. I didn't buy that because I just had the 3 separate ones. So I would put the square, the circle, the triangle all together, and he would do that as a multi-piece puzzle. Now, ideally, maybe it's all on the same board. You can buy those, that's great. I just didn't really want to buy another thing when we already had this specific one. So instead of buying a new one, we just did that, and that worked really great. And he was not super into them, but he got it and he would do them. And so that was a bit after a year. And then I started introducing more complicated ones. So that was those ones I did have a board, and it had different shapes other than just square, circle, triangle. We had a rectangle, had I think a trapezoid or something like one of those shapes. So I introduced ones with more shapes and also introduced a size discrimination circle puzzle. So I introduced both the circle and the multi-shape one around 15, 16 months. Those ones both also had baby faces underneath, which he found more engaging. So I did those and he liked them. He wasn't super into them. He preferred the size discrimination one with the circles getting smaller to the multi-shape one. So I did that around 15, 16 months. Then a little later, I think also around 16 months, it was probably 15 months for the shapes. Around 16 months, I introduced a vegetable puzzle. This one came in our Love Every kit. I was really excited about it. And he did it once, like first day, and then he just wasn't interested in it. And in retrospect, I introduced this one way too early. He was not ready at 16 months. So even though he was trying that first day, he wasn't really getting it. I introduced it months later at about 20 months. Again, I brought it back out and he loved it. He really devoured it. Interestingly, with that vegetable puzzle though, he could only really do it upside down. Unsure why. So it's funny because I actually posted about this on Instagram and I got other people who said, I'm gonna try it. My child really struggles with the vegetable puzzle. They also flipped it and had the same experience. So even though he was super confident with it when it was upside down, he really struggled with it right side up. So that was an interesting one there. So that one I definitely introduced a bit early, and in retrospect, it was too early. But what I liked about that one is it has smaller knobs. So that is, again, refining the pincer grasp. So when you're looking at knobbed puzzles, you'll see ones that have larger knobs and ones that have smaller knobs. You're probably starting out with ones with larger knobs, and you can move towards the ones with smaller knobs, and those really do refine the pincer grasp even more. So just something to keep in mind when I mentioned that my son preferred it upside down, found it easier upside down, is just experiment. If your child is struggling with a puzzle or something, experiment what might change it, what might make it easier for them, what might make it more engaging for them. All things to keep in mind. There are so many ways to present something. You could present it all together, you can present it separate, just sort of seeing what engages your child more. There's no right answer. Sometimes a child likes it if all the pieces are already in and they can start like that. Others like it with pieces in a basket on the side. It's big in a Montessori world right now on Instagram particularly to talk about presenting materials undone. So with this piece is separate, but it's just something to keep in mind with anything, that it's really all about observing your own child, what engages them more. Hence the same thing with flipping a puzzle upside down. There's so many different possible things that, to think about. Another thing to keep in mind with peg puzzles is some have a guide underneath and some do not. So some are going to have an exact picture match underneath, such as the vegetable puzzle. Others might have an outline that shows the picture of what it is, but it's not exactly the same. And others will have nothing underneath and will just be the wood underneath. So that's something to keep in mind, because even though they might really look sort of the same, they might look like the same level of difficulty because it's the same number of shapes or the same type of shape. That's not necessarily true. So one that is a vehicle or a vegetable or whatever that has the guide underneath, that has the picture underneath, becomes matching as well, and that is going to be easier than one where they just need to match the outline of the actual puzzle piece. For example, these two puzzles might look like a similar challenge level, but they're really not, just because one has that guide underneath and the other doesn't. And so one he was able to do far earlier than the other. It's a lot more abstract. When you have no guide, they have to actually match around the shape instead of matching the pictures underneath to the piece they have. So starting out, you want to start with those ones that have the picture underneath, that's the exact match underneath, so that they can match the picture to the picture underneath to the picture on the piece, and work on those puzzle skills before having to figure out just based on the shape. So that's just a way to sort of start out with a simpler thing before going to more challenging. So as I mentioned, he wasn't super interested in this vegetable puzzle. When I first introduced it at 16 months, he did it for like a day and then completely didn't touch it. He loved it again around 21 months. And so at that point, he mastered it pretty quickly. And to extend the life of this puzzle and his other puzzles, his face puzzles with the shapes and with the different circles, I started doing puzzle mix-up. So there, what I would do is I would take a basket, put all of the different puzzle pieces in from all the different puzzles, and put the puzzles around and let him really do like a giant puzzle. And he absolutely loved that. And that was a really, really fun extension for the puzzles he had already mastered. Again, that's all about finding ways to keep using something after after they've mastered it, to extend the life. So similar to knobbed puzzles are inset puzzles that do not have knobs. One of these is actually what first got him super interested in puzzles. I'll talk about that puzzle. But these, as I mentioned, are similar to knobbed puzzles. They might have a guide underneath or they might not. Again, if they have the guide underneath, the photo matching, that is easier versus the ones that do not. These are similar though, they function the same way, they just don't have that knob. So I do tend to prefer ones with knobs just because of the pincer grasp practice. I prefer to do that when possible, but you'll have a lot more options for these ones without knobs. There tend to be a lot more options for those. So you can find something that really engages your child, which for us was the key to getting my son really into puzzles. We got this vehicle puzzle, it's a Melissa and Doug vehicle puzzle, and he was absolutely obsessed with it. He absolutely loved his puzzle. Did it over and over again for months. I left it on the shelf for months because he would do it multiple times throughout the day, every single day. So he was really into vehicles, and so that was a perfect one to introduce to him. And it really got him so interested in puzzles where he hadn't been particularly passionate before. So that's something of just the great thing about the non-knobbed puzzles is there are just so many more options. You can find something that really matches your child's interest. As I mentioned, the one we got was Melissa and Doug, and they have a whole bunch of different types. but it doesn't have to be them. It can be anything, just something that really matches what your child's interested in can be a great way to do more for puzzle introduction there. So we introduced the vehicle one around 20 months and he was completely and utterly obsessed. As I said, he did it for months. So a much more challenging one he started doing a few months later was this elephant size discrimination puzzle. And again, as I mentioned, with no guide is going to be a lot more challenging than one with a guide. So while the vehicle puzzle had a guide underneath, this elephant one did not. When I first introduced it, I introduced it a bit after he had mastered the vehicle puzzle and it was too difficult. He was not able to do it and I took it off the shelf and I brought it back a couple months later and he did it very easily and he loved it then. So probably sometime in between would have been a great time to introduce, but I introduced it again and he had already had those skills and I'd already introduced jigsaw puzzles at this point. He mastered it very quickly, but he still enjoyed it. So I wouldn't call it a loss, it was still a win. He still really enjoyed it, but he had mastered it very, very quickly. We also introduced a size and color discrimination puzzle he loved. I'd say he loved this one about the same time as the Melissa and Doug vehicle one. So we introduced that one about the same time and he really enjoyed that as well. With all of these, you can really find a large variance in the level of challenge. You're going to find some puzzles that are very challenging, even if they're knobbed puzzles, that when your child is interested in jigsaw puzzles and really doing jigsaw puzzles, they might still find challenging. And there are some Montessori puzzles, for example, that are introduced in the 3 to 6 age group. But you can find more challenging ones. His name puzzle, for example, is a way more challenging puzzle versus some of the other simpler knobbed ones. So when we first introduced that one, when he was really into the first knobbed puzzles, it was way too hard for him. Now he can do it pretty well, but it's still a more challenging puzzle. So that's just something to look out for. Again, as I mentioned many times, the guides are something to look for. Look for how complicated the pieces are. Do they slide right in, or is it something you really have to finagle? And if it's something you really have to finagle, that's going to be a more challenging one. You want to wait until your child is ready for that. During that time, we also started introducing jigsaw puzzles. So I'm going to get into those, but first I'm going to take a brief little recess to talk about some other types of puzzles, 3D puzzles and nesting puzzles. The reason is because if your child is not interested in these knob peg puzzles or the inset puzzles, this is something else to try because your child may be interested in these. I know my son was not particularly interested in the knob or peg puzzles, again, until he was about 20 months and we did the vehicle one, but he was interested in some of these 3D and nesting puzzles prior. So it's something else to try if your child is not particularly interested in those specific puzzles. So first, 3D puzzles. The most simple 3D puzzle is going to be that egg in the cup. And you might call it a puzzle, you might not, but I'd say it is a type of 3D puzzle. And that is when you're introducing to an infant and it is simply a cup with an egg and that works on the palmar grasp. This is great to introduce when your baby starts enjoying taking things in and putting things out to work on this. And this one is a palmar grasp one, so they don't need the pincer grasp yet. But after that, you can introduce some pincer grasp puzzles that are also similar, that are 3-dimensional in that way. When your child gets older, there are other things you can try here, such as these different sized rod ones. We really enjoyed those. Even when he was not into the other types of puzzles, he really loved these different rod size puzzles. The 3D puzzle he's working on now is a rocket puzzle. So he's enjoying this one, and it is definitely a challenge for him now at 26 months, but this is one he has been working on as well. Another puzzle you can introduce at the same time as the knob puzzles and the 3D puzzles are nesting puzzles. So my son really enjoyed a few of these. He enjoyed this one, which has different shapes that you sort of nest together. And that one he was enjoying around 19 months. And he loved it, even when he was not interested in some of the peg puzzles at this point. So he really loved this 18, 19 months, I'd say. And then he continued to like it for a bit. And then we tried this circle size discrimination puzzle. He loved this one, but he did master it very quickly. So he mastered it day one. We got it when he was 20 months old. He loved it and mastered it immediately. So I wanted to find a more challenging one that uses the same nesting scale, but was more challenging, but still doable. And I did struggle a bit to find that. So I ended up getting this elephant nesting one. And this one was perfect, except it was definitely pretty challenging for him at the time. So he was unable to do this at 20 months. Now at 26 months, he does it pretty easily and he enjoys it. But there's a big leap between that circle one and an elephant shaped one, or if they're bunny ones, they're different ones that I've seen people get, but it's a pretty big leap between those two. So you kind of have a bit of a gap there. I've seen some sort of more simplistic ones, but nothing that's sort of simple enough. Like I would have ideally liked, a square, a triangle, something like that as that intermediate stage, but I couldn't find any of those. If you do find any of those, I'd love to know in the comments. So let me know if you found any that are nesting like this that have difficulty between a circle and the elephants. I did find the one house-shaped one, which was a little bit in between, but I still think was not exactly what I was looking for an in-between stage. Okay, so now on to jigsaw puzzles, which are the current love of my son's life. He is obsessed with jigsaw puzzles. So we introduced our first jigsaw puzzle around when he turned 2. The first jigsaw puzzle we introduced was this chunky jigsaw puzzle. This is a great one. This is from our Love Every kit. I know that they exist elsewhere, but I have not been able to find a link elsewhere to a similar type of puzzle. So if you have one, drop it in the comments. I'd love to see it. I thought I saw one at one point and then I could not actually find a link for it. So this is a chunky one, and that is great for little hands working on this more complex skill of putting jigsaw puzzles together. What I didn't love about this puzzle is it's two-sided, and I found that was a bit more challenging for my son when he first started doing it. So now he likes to sort of make shapes with it sometimes instead of making the whole puzzle together. But it was frustrating for him when he first started that he would be unable, that he would have a piece and it has color on top. So it has color on both sides, so he would think that, why does this not fit in? So that was my one complaint on that one. I didn't really think that that was the best design. I would have loved it to be colored only on one side so that it gave him a bit more of a control of error and he kind of knew what he was doing a bit more on that. So that was the first one. He liked it. He didn't love it. And I felt like it took us a little bit before he truly mastered it. And now he's mastered it and he really enjoys it, but that's, a few months later. So the first real jigsaw puzzle he got into was baby and mother matching animals. So we introduced this one around 22, 23 months, I'd say. So a bit before 2, and he was really into matching at the time, and he was really into picture-to-picture matching. Because you start with, I've mentioned this before, but you start with object to object, object to picture, then picture to picture. So he was really into picture to picture, and he'd been doing exact pictures and then not exact pictures. So these are not exact because you are matching a baby animal to a mother animal or parent animal. I think some are actually like adult male animals. So you're matching an adult animal to a baby animal. And he loved these. So a great thing about these is you can really adjust the difficulty. You can start with a very small number and with ones that are more similar. So example, the baby cow is a lot more similar to the mother cow than the baby frog is to the mother frog is to the tadpole. So those you're wanting to probably start with ones that are more similar and just having a small selection. And now my son, as he totally mastered those, he likes to have all of them out and he likes to take the whole box and match them all together. So yeah, there are the simpler ones and the more challenging ones, and that's a great starting point. They can really work on that skill of putting together jigsaws, also work on their matching skills and learning the different animals that go together, and you can really adjust the difficulty, which is a really great thing about this, is instead of having to buy so many different things, it's one easy way to adjust the difficulty with purchase of one thing. So once he got into these adult and baby animal matching puzzles, I wanted to introduce one where he is working on a full picture. So basically where you're putting together, a picture, it's all parts of a picture. Because here it's just matching versus creating the complete picture. So I started with these progressive puzzles. So these ones start with a 2-piece one, then they have a 4-piece one, a 6-piece one, and an 8-piece one. I felt like this was perfect for him as a way to work through varying levels of challenge and to scaffold his skills. I do wish they were realistic. They're really cartoony. My preference is always realistic. That's Montessori preference and just my preference personally. But I couldn't find any that were realistic, and I felt like it's so worth it that these have that progressive skill development. So he started with the 2-piece pig one, got that day one super easily, loved it. And even as I started introducing the other puzzles, the ones that are, both 4 pieces, 6 pieces, 8 pieces, he always wanted me to still have the pig puzzle out, and he would do that first. So that 2-piece one. So we started with that, and then we introduced the 2-piece and a 4-piece on day one because he got the 2-piece absolutely immediately. So we did the 4-piece one as well, and he got that one pretty quickly. We moved on to the 6-piece and the 8-piece. And again, that was just a really great way to scaffold those skills, to get used to the idea of putting a picture together. So one thing to keep in mind if your child is struggling with a puzzle like this is you can get a reference sheet. You could print this out yourself, a picture of the puzzle that's the same size as the puzzle, and they can do it on top. And that can be a great way to scaffold these skills if your child is struggling a bit more with that. We personally did not do that. We just had him do the pieces without it, and we had the reference sheet, like the picture of what the puzzle was going to look like, separate. It would be on the box and he could see it there. So that's just something to keep in mind, though. If your child is struggling with this sort of puzzle, that is something you can do to make it a little bit easier and to help them develop those skills. So we also have these head to tail puzzles. These ones are also fantastic, and they're made by the same company who does the matching of the baby and mom animal ones. So I started these a bit after I started the 2, 4, 6, 8 puzzle progression. I'd say I introduced these probably after the 4 puzzle one. And he definitely found them pretty easy at the point that I introduced them. What I like about these is they are realistic. And again, similar to the baby and adult matching animal one, you can vary the level of difficulty. So he pretty quickly wanted all of them out. He wanted every single piece and to really do it like that. But if you have a child who's just starting out, you can start out with just 1 or just 2 animals, because again, it is working on the complete picture. I found this one a bit simpler because it's just puzzle. It just has, the insets, yikes, I can't think of a word. You just have to match, each side. It's not sort of the 4-piece one on the other set that I got, it's like this. So you're having to match 2 different sides. This one, it's just in a line. So that's definitely simpler, which for better or for worse, I think that can be great if that's where your child is. I wanted to do the progressive puzzles because I wanted him to start working on, needing to match 2 different sides on a puzzle. But these animal ones are great, and that is a great next step. Possibly after the animal matching of the baby and adult animal, or like I did while you're doing a progressive puzzle set. I thought that was a great time, even though he did master them pretty quickly and started wanting to have the whole set out, but he loved it, and you can have the whole set out. Is something that's pretty great there. After introducing the progressive puzzles, I moved on to this Melissa and Doug 12-piece set. So it comes with 4 different puzzles, and we started with the fire truck because he just loves fire trucks. So at first I felt like this was a bit of a leap because it's smaller pieces, because it's just a more challenging puzzle with, less diversity of what each piece looks like. There's a lot more red, for example, on all of the pieces. But after he did it for a couple days, he really became pretty proficient at it. He struggled for a day or 2, and now he does it really, really quickly. So I'd originally thought maybe I should have introduced another progressive puzzle in between, but after watching him do it for a few days, I felt like this was the perfect next step. Now we're working on 16 and 20-piece puzzles. This one is actually a magnetic set because we're using it while traveling, but that's where we are now. So now on to larger puzzles. As I mentioned, my son is obsessed with this 48-piece floor puzzle from Skillmatics. Oh my goodness, this construction puzzle. He is obsessed. He wants to do it every single day, all day. So I'm going to say something now that might ruffle some feathers because I know independent play is super, super emphasized right now. I think this is an awesome opportunity to play with your child and to do it together with your child. And I know independent play is important. I also think that playing with your child is important, and this is such a great opportunity if your child's interested and you like puzzles too. I really think of jigsaw puzzles as a social activity. Having them, I've been to, a lot of families will have them out on a table and you work on it together, which I think is just wonderful. So this one, I introduced this actually, I think prior to starting any of the progressive puzzles. I think this was the first, we introduced this one right around his second birthday after he'd done the animal matching ones. And he found it, so I bought it and I was really excited about it, and he found it and he's like, I want to do this. And then, he really wanted to do it. And so I told him, okay, we'll do it. And doing this puzzle with him has been such a great experience, and I feel like it really gave him the skills to do other jigsaw puzzles. It got him interested in jigsaw puzzles because, again, as I mentioned with the other vehicle one he had, it's really all about finding something that interests your child. So he loves construction. This got him really into jigsaw puzzles. So I have no regrets for how we introduced this one. And when we started, he needed a lot of support. So I'm going to talk a bit about how I supported him through it. And I just have felt like I feel like he has gained so many skills from this. And really, it taught him how to do a jigsaw puzzle by doing it together. So here, I try to help him in the same way that I would for helping him with anything when he asks for help, which is by giving the least amount of help that he needs to get through it, get through the challenge and keep working. But here I'm also was doing the puzzle with him. So I would also be putting pieces together as well. But when he asked for help, I would try to give him the least amount I could give him for him to keep going and work through the challenge. So, with that, it's okay to me that he needs help, that he isn't able to do it totally independently. I had no problem with that. And now after having the puzzle for a couple months, he can do most of it independently. And he does this puzzle all the time, and he really can get very large portions of it. I don't think he's ever done it like completely 100% independently, but I'll come in and he will have it basically done. So he's made so much progress on that, and I have no problem with the fact that I helped him and continue to help him sometimes with this puzzle. I think that was just a great way for us to work on those skills. So a few things that I tried that helped him. First was I would make piles of vehicles. So for example, I would make a pile that is the backhoe. I would make a top pile that is the forklift. So he could work through these smaller sections before putting them together into the bigger section. So another thing is while working beside him, I would narrate my own thought process. So I'd say something like, I'm looking for another yellow vehicle with part of a wheel. I see part of a wheel here. Where's the other part? All of that, just narrating what I was thinking, what I was looking for, what I was doing, to sort of narrate how you think through a puzzle. And this was giving him an understanding of how someone might think through putting together a puzzle. So I would also narrate my own struggles. If I would narrate struggling to put a piece together, I can't find it, these aren't fitting. I'm just trying to narrate those frustrations to show productive frustration struggle, and to help him have that in his mind as well for when he is dealing with frustration. I would also help him notice things when he was stuck. So I would narrate for him what he might be looking for. So for example, if he's able to do it this way, what I might say is, what do you see here? I see part of a safety hat here. What do you see? What do you think we might be looking for? Or, I see we're building a forklift. What do you think might need to be down here? And say, maybe it's wheels, for example. You'd say wheels, and you go looking for it.
Wheels.
Yeah, where do you think they might go?
That thing. So what they go. Let's go. Let's go. Those go together.
That's right, those go together. So otherwise, though, if he wasn't quite getting that, I'd say, I see part of a safety hat. Wonder if we can find another part of the safety hat, and have him go look for it. So that was sort of another way of doing it, is just narrating him through what he's working through. In the same way that I would narrate my own thoughts, I would help him to have that language to figure out what might sort of get in his mind, how to think through what he's looking for at any given time. And give as much or as little help as necessary. So if possible, try to get him to come up with what he might be looking for. But if he's stumped, sort of tell him what maybe we should be looking for and let him look for it. So as something I did when he was first starting out, and I still do now as like a second or third resort, is hand him pieces. So when I first started out, I would sometimes hand him a piece because I would know that, we have say 4 pieces together, and there aren't, most of this 48-piece puzzle is not going to fit onto one of these 4 pieces. So I'd hand him a piece that could fit on, and he would be able to find which spot it goes in. So that's where I sort of started with that, would be handing him pieces. I do that a lot less now. So now, as I mentioned, I try to guide him through thinking what might be there, and if he can't do that, telling him what might be there. And then if he's still struggling with that, I will sometimes direct him to a pile that has the piece that's missing in there and have him go find it in the pile if I see it. But sometimes I will still hand him a piece particularly if he is super set on like having a certain piece go in. Like sometimes he will really want to put whatever is here, and he'll be trying to put other pieces onto this specific spot, and I sometimes will hand him a piece and just let him do that. But that's a technique, is to sort of hand pieces and let them figure out where it goes into the puzzle. And I still occasionally do it, but that was something I did a lot more when he was first starting out with the puzzle. So sometimes also I would place the piece he needed somewhere just, near him in his vision so he could find it. Instead of just having him look through the box, this would just be a way to give a little bit more assistance, but still let him find it on his own, but to make sure that it was in the spot that he's looking so that he can hopefully find it there if he's needing a specific piece. One challenge with a big puzzle can be frustration. As I mentioned, I do my best to model frustration tolerance and dealing with my own frustration and showing myself working through something difficult, challenging. We also have language around that. We have a sort of verbal thing we do of, that was tricky, but I did it. And so I would say that as I'm doing it, that was tricky, but I did it. And he says it too. So sometimes if he does something, he's excited, I was like, that was tricky. And he'll say, but I did it. So that's something that we do a lot. But also just, as I said, showing that frustration and working through that frustration is a really useful tool for building their frustration tolerance. And sometimes that doesn't work and they're frustrated. And I would give him, empathy. I would help him sort of regulate through that together and then help him problem solve how to get past that. So one place he does get the most frustrated is when pieces come out. So he'll have pieces together, he'll be trying to put in a new piece, and then another one snaps out and stuff starts falling apart. And that tends to be where he gets the most frustrated. And so in those cases, I'll try to help him regulate and then, express that was frustrating. It's really frustrating when pieces come off. That's something that I think is really worth making sure, you acknowledge. It's frustrating when you've been working on something and you've worked really hard on something and then it falls apart. Like that is frustrating. So really showing that empathy, helping him through it, and then offering whatever support he needs for that, which might be, oh, can I hold this piece and help you hold this piece so you can get the other piece in, hold it together, etc. And sometimes it might mean helping him rebuild what has fallen apart, because it can be really frustrating when you've worked really hard on something and it falls apart. So that help can be really useful. Also, sometimes he would get frustrated and he's really struggling with a piece, with finding where it goes or whatever. And sometimes I would recommend, why don't we take a break from this piece? I want to try a different piece. And this is something I noticed him doing a lot more on his own after I helped him through this quite a few times, is he'd be able to I see him getting frustrated and he'd be able to put it down, choose a different piece and come back to that one. And so often he'd choose a different piece, put it in, come back to the piece he was struggling with and really get it right away. Because sometimes you need a moment of headspace to sort of think through these things, because you're getting frustrated and you just need a break from that, and that can help. So yeah, I did think, again, modeling my own frustration, modeling that it was tricky, but I did it. Those were really helpful, because the truth is this puzzle is not super easy. There are parts now where he gets pieces together. I'm like, I didn't realize that went together, because I don't find this puzzle super easy. And so there are parts where I find it tricky. And even if I'm not really getting super frustrated by it, it's just helpful to model that working through something. So that is our puzzle progression. That was long. So to outline of what I talked about, because I hope that it was a lot. So starting with those single piece circle puzzles, moving towards multi-piece inset peg puzzles, then you can look towards moving towards jigsaw. So you might still be working on peg puzzles when you're doing jigsaws. We still do inset peg puzzles, but he's also doing these jigsaws. And he really has a lot going now at once for puzzles. So he is doing some nesting puzzles, and he is also doing these jigsaw puzzles, and he is doing some of those inset puzzles, those peg puzzles. So he's really doing all of those kind of at once right now. And that's possible because there are different sort of skills And you might also, it's sometimes useful to have something easier, which can help build their confidence and give them sort of that confidence boost to work on some of the more challenging ones. So that's a bit of a progression of what puzzles look like, some of the skills I use, and some of the things that I've thought through. And so as I mentioned, my son was not always super into puzzles, really until about 20 months. He just like, take it or leave it for most of them. He enjoyed some of those 3D and nesting ones. Peg ones were always a take it or leave it situation. Around 20 months, got super into them suddenly. And since then, for the last, 6 months, it's crazy. Time flies. Now for the last 6 months, puzzles have been his great love. We've done all sorts of different types. So thank you so much for joining. I hope this was helpful. I hope you got some interesting or useful information about how to introduce puzzles to your child, about what worked for us. And these are, things that worked for us personally and things that I have read from other people who have also shared about puzzle progressions and Montessori, etc. So thank you so much for joining. Subscribe for more about Montessori, motherhood, learning, parenting, all of those sorts of things. Thank you so much.